A wealthy and powerful man thought he had buried his past forever, until one fateful moment changed everything. A single encounter with a stranger sets off a chain of events that will leave him questioning everything he thought he knew. Before we start, let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching, and don't forget to subscribe. You can't do this, Nick. Emma Carter's voice trembled with desperation as she clutched the newborn in her arms, her dark eyes glistening with unshed tears. The tiny baby whimpered, his fragile body wrapped in a soft blue blanket, oblivious to the cruel fate being decided for him. Nick Whitmore's grip tightened on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched so hard it ached. The rain pounded against the windshield, the wipers barely keeping up with the storm's fury. He didn't dare look at her, at the child, because deep down in the place he refused to acknowledge, guilt coiled around his throat like a noose. "This isn't up for debate, Emma," he said coldly, his voice as sharp as the lightning splitting the sky outside. "You knew what this was. You knew this couldn't last." Emma let out a bitter laugh, a sound more painful than a sob. "Last?" she spat. "This isn't about us, Nick. This is about him." She cradled the baby protectively, as if shielding him from the venom in Nick's words. "He's your son. Your flesh and blood. How can you just throw him away like he's nothing?" Nick's hands tightened around the wheel. This was supposed to be simple. He had made his choice weeks ago when Emma came to him, her belly swollen with his mistake, begging him to do the right thing. He had shut the door in her face then. And now, as the car rolled to a stop on the side of a deserted, rain-drenched road, he was shutting the door again, this time on his own child. The storm outside howled like a living thing, wind rattling the car as he put it in park. "Get out," he said flatly. Emma's breath hitched. You're serious?" "Emma," Nick exhaled sharply, forcing himself to meet her gaze. "This child ruins everything. You know what's at stake. I'm marrying Victoria in 3 weeks. Her father is a senator. I've worked my whole life to be in this position. I can't." He stopped himself. He wouldn't beg. He didn't need to explain. Emma's grip on the baby tightened. "If you walk away from him now, you'll regret it, Nick," she whispered, voice raw with heartbreak. "One day when you have everything you wanted, you'll realize what you lost." Nick ignored the ache in his chest. "I don't have a choice." "Yes, you do." Emma's voice cracked. "You're choosing power over your own son. And one day you'll pay for it." Her words sliced through him like a blade, but he refused to let them wound him. He reached over, pried the baby from her arms, ignoring the way she sobbed, the way the infant squirmed and let out a soft cry, and opened the door. Cold rain lashed at his skin as he stepped out onto the muddy roadside. He moved quickly, his expensive shoes sinking into the wet earth. "Don't hesitate. Just do it." He laid the baby down gently as if that somehow made it better. The blue blanket wrapped snugly around the child's small frame. "He won't survive the night." Nick swallowed hard. "That's the point." A silver glint caught his eye, the medallion around the baby's neck, the only thing left of Nick's mother. Eleanor's medallion. He had given it to Emma in secret, once upon a time, a sentimental keepsake he thought meant nothing. Now it felt like an anchor weighing him down. Shaking off the moment of weakness, he forced himself to stand. Emma was out of the car now, screaming through the rain, her dark hair plastered to her face. "Nick, don't do this. Please." Nick turned on his heel, his heart a stone in his chest, and climbed back into the car. He slammed the door shut, muffling Emma's cries. "Don't look back." His hands trembled as he put the car in gear. The baby's wails pierced through the storm, but Nick pressed down on the gas pedal. The tires spun for a moment in the mud before the car surged forward, leaving behind the woman who loved him and the child he refused to claim. His pulse pounded in his ears. The road blurred. The rain lashed against the windshield like accusations he couldn't escape. But he never looked back. Not once. And in doing so, Nick Whitmore sealed his fate. "Oh dear God, someone help." Maggie Dawson's voice cracked with fear as she sprinted toward the tiny bundle lying in the middle of the rain-slicked road. Headlights from an approaching car barreled toward them, the engine roaring through the storm. The baby's fragile cries barely rose above the thunder, swallowed by the downpour. Maggie didn't think. She acted. Throwing herself forward, she snatched the infant up in her arms and tumbled backward, landing in the wet grass as the vehicle sped past, its tires kicking up muddy water where the baby had just been. Her heart slammed against her ribs. A second later and he would have been gone. The baby's cries were thin, weak. Maggie sat up, her soaked uniform clinging to her skin as she looked down at the small, shivering boy. He was wrapped in a blue blanket, the fabric damp and muddy from the storm. A tiny silver medallion gleamed against his chest, the only hint of warmth on his frail little body. "Who did this to you, sweetheart?" Maggie whispered, her fingers trembling as she touched his icy cheek. She looked around, searching for someone, anyone, but the road was empty. No sign of the heartless soul who had left him here. No footsteps in the mud. No mother frantically searching for her lost child. Just her. And this baby. Lightning cracked across the sky, making the boy flinch. Maggie cradled him closer, shielding him with her body. "This is no place for you," she murmured, pressing her lips to his damp forehead. "Come on, let's get you out of the rain." Holding him close, she rose to her feet and hurried toward her tiny home at the edge of town, completely unaware that this night, this child, had just changed her life forever. Maggie Dawson's house was small, old, and barely standing, but it was home. It had been passed down from her mother, who had worked her fingers to the bone to keep a roof over their heads. The wind rattled the thin walls as Maggie rushed inside, kicking the door shut behind her. The baby whimpered, his tiny fists shaking. He was so cold. Maggie grabbed the nearest towel, quickly drying him off before peeling back the soaked blue blanket. His face was pale, delicate, so heartbreakingly perfect. Her chest ached as she looked at him. "Who could leave you like this?" she whispered, brushing her fingers against the sparse tufts of soft brown hair on his head. No note. No sign of a family searching for him. Just an abandoned child with nothing but a medallion and the storm to keep him company. The baby opened his eyes, a shade of piercing green that stole Maggie's breath. The kind of eyes that held stories too big for someone so small. "You need a name," Maggie murmured, rocking him gently. "Something strong. Something good." She hesitated for only a second before smiling softly. "Alex," she decided. "That's what I'll call you. Alex Dawson." The baby blinked up at her, his tiny lips parting in a yawn. A yawn that undid her completely. Maggie had always been careful. She had never been reckless, never made impulsive choices. But as she cradled Alex against her chest, feeling his warmth seep into her tired bones, she knew there was no turning back. He was hers now, and she would do whatever it took to protect him. Across town, Nick Whitmore toasted to his new life. His penthouse gleamed under the glow of the city skyline, a perfect palace for a man who had everything. His bride, Victoria Harrington, stood beside him, her long blonde hair cascading down the back of her silk wedding gown. The daughter of Senator William Harrington. The final piece in Nick's perfect life. They had been married just hours ago in the grandest ceremony of the season. A match made in power, not love. Nick smiled as he swirled the whiskey in his glass, watching the way Victoria spoke to her father across the room, already making connections, solidifying his place among the elite. This was everything he wanted. Power. Wealth. Influence. The past? Buried. The child? Gone. He had won. But as he took a slow sip of whiskey, he thought, just for a fleeting moment, he could still hear the sound of a baby crying. It was probably just the storm. Probably. At that very moment, on the other side of town, Maggie Dawson rocked Alex in her arms, humming softly. She had dried him, wrapped him in a fresh blanket, and fed him what little milk she had. He clung to her, his tiny fingers curling against her chest as if he had never known warmth before. And maybe Maggie realized he hadn't. "You're safe now, baby boy," she whispered, running her fingers over the silver medallion still hanging from his neck. "I don't know where you came from, but I promise you this." She bent down, kissing his forehead as if sealing the vow. "You'll never be alone again." Outside, the storm raged on, but within the walls of Maggie's tiny home, a new story had just begun. And neither she nor Alex knew that one day, the past would come back to find them. Maggie Dawson sat stiffly in the cramped doctor's office, her hands clenched into tight fists in her lap. The room smelled of antiseptic, the fluorescent lights buzzing softly overhead. Across from her, Dr. Matthew Grant, a kind-eyed physician in his 50s, let out a weary sigh as he set down the file in his hands. Maggie's heart pounded against her ribs. "Please don't say it. Please don't confirm what I already fear." "Ms. Dawson," Dr. Grant said gently, "Alex has a serious heart condition, congenital heart disease. His heart isn't functioning the way it should, and he's going to need surgery." The world tilted beneath her. "Surgery?" Maggie's voice came out in a whisper, as if speaking any louder would make it real. She looked down at Alex, barely 3 years old, seated in a tiny chair beside her, swinging his legs. He looked so healthy, so full of life. She swallowed hard. "How much?" Dr. Grant hesitated. "The surgery itself, along with hospital expenses, will cost close to $80,000. Maggie's breath caught in her throat. 80,000. It might as well have been $1 million. I don't have that kind of money, she admitted, her voice breaking. Is there any other way? Dr. Grant's expression softened. There are charities, but funding is limited. We can apply, but it could take months, maybe even years to get approval. Time isn't on our side. Maggie forced herself to breathe. No, I will not let this child die. Alex tugged at her sleeve, his big green eyes staring up at her. Mommy? His little voice was laced with concern. Maggie quickly wiped away a stray tear and mustered a smile. It's okay, sweetheart. We'll figure this out. But deep down she didn't know how. The town gossip mill was a powerful thing, and word of Maggie's situation spread faster than she could control. That was how Eleanor Whitmore, a wealthy yet reclusive elderly woman, heard about the child with the silver medallion. Eleanor sat on the grand terrace of her estate, overlooking the city skyline with a contemplative frown. She hadn't seen her son, Nick Whitmore, in over 15 years. They had parted on bad terms, her refusal to condone his ruthless ambition driving a wedge between them. She had no family left. Or so she thought. When she heard about a poor boy with emerald green eyes and a medallion identical to the one she had given her son as a child, something inside her told her to investigate. And when she laid eyes on Alex Dawson, her heart nearly stopped. He looked just like Nick. It was impossible. Unbelievable. And yet, deep down she knew. Alex Whitmore. Nick's abandoned child. Maggie had long given up hope of affording Alex's surgery when the phone call came. I want to meet the boy, Eleanor Whitmore said. Her voice was firm but kind. Bring him to my estate tomorrow morning. Maggie hesitated. Eleanor Whitmore. She had heard the name before. She was an old money philanthropist, though she had vanished from the social scene years ago. Why was she interested in Alex? Desperation overrode hesitation. She agreed. The next morning, Maggie arrived at Eleanor's estate, clutching Alex's small hand as they stepped through the grand entrance. The house was massive, almost suffocating, a world away from their tiny home. Eleanor sat in a high-backed chair, her frail hands clasped in front of her. She took one look at Alex and gasped, covering her mouth. Maggie didn't understand. Why was she crying? Eleanor knelt before Alex, her hands trembling as she touched his face. Your eyes, they are just like... She cut herself off, her voice shaking. Maggie cleared her throat. Mrs. Whitmore, You need help, Eleanor interrupted. For his surgery. Maggie swallowed hard. Yes, but I don't understand. Why do you care? Eleanor looked at her, and for the first time, there was something haunted in her expression. Because I've failed someone before, she whispered. I won't fail again. She handed Maggie a check for $80,000. Maggie's knees nearly buckled. The surgery. Alex could be saved. Tears spilled down her face as she grasped Eleanor's hands. I don't know how to thank you. Eleanor only smiled, though sadness lingered in her gaze. You already have. But what Maggie didn't know, what Eleanor never told her, was that she had just emptied her entire savings. Eleanor had given everything she had left to save the grandson she never knew. The surgery was scheduled. Alex would live. But Eleanor Whitmore, she would not. A week later, she collapsed at home. Doctors diagnosed her with late-stage heart failure. There was nothing to be done. Maggie rushed to the hospital, confused, afraid, grateful, but mostly desperate to understand. Eleanor was too weak to sit up, her breath coming in slow, shallow gasps. Her hand trembled as she reached out and grasped Maggie's wrist. Listen to me, she whispered. Maggie leaned in, her heart pounding. Alex, he is... Eleanor struggled to speak, but every word was a battle. Her frail fingers clutched the silver medallion around Alex's neck. Maggie watched, confused, as Eleanor gently pressed the locket open. Inside, a tiny engraving. N.W. Maggie froze. Nick Whitmore. Her mouth went dry. No, it couldn't be. He is his son, Eleanor rasped. Nick's son. Maggie's world shattered. But before she could ask anything else, before Eleanor could say one more word, the old woman's breath hitched, then stopped. The monitor flatlined. Eleanor Whitmore was gone. The only person who knew the whole truth, the only person who could have revealed everything, was dead. And Maggie was left holding the hand of a boy who would one day come face to face with the father who had abandoned him. A father who still had no idea that his past was about to return. The rhythmic beeping of the hospital monitor was the only sound in the quiet room. Maggie Dawson sat beside Alex's hospital bed, her fingers gently brushing through his soft brown hair as he slept. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the air, but to Maggie this room, this moment, was nothing short of a miracle. Alex had survived. The surgery, funded entirely by Eleanor Whitmore's sacrifice, had been a success. The doctors were optimistic, and for the first time in months, Maggie felt the crushing weight on her chest begin to lift. She squeezed his small hand, her heart swelling with relief. She had almost lost him. But he was here. He was safe. The silver medallion, the only clue to his past, glinted under the dim hospital lights. Maggie stared at it, remembering Eleanor's final, unfinished words. He is his son. Maggie had tried to push the thought away, but it lingered like a shadow. Nick Whitmore. She knew his name. Everyone did. He was a powerhouse in the business world, a man of untouchable status. And now she carried his secret. Should she tell Alex one day? Should she seek out Nick? Her grip tightened around his hand. No. Nick Whitmore had abandoned his son in the middle of a storm. He had made his choice. And Maggie had made hers. She kissed Alex's forehead. You're mine, sweetheart. No one will ever take you away from me. Whatever his past was, it no longer mattered. Alex was hers. And she would never let him go. Years passed, and Alex grew into a strong, resilient young man. He never knew about the twist of fate that had saved him, nor did he question why his mother looked at him with a mixture of pride and sadness when he wore the silver medallion around his neck. To him it was just a lucky charm. From an early age, Maggie taught him the value of kindness and hard work. Their life was simple but filled with love. She worked long hours as a seamstress and part-time cook, scraping together what little they had to ensure Alex had a stable childhood. Even when times were hard, she never let Alex go to bed hungry. He quickly learned that life wasn't easy, but kindness cost nothing. One evening, at just 10 years old, Alex came home with a torn jacket and a bruised lip. Maggie nearly dropped the dish she was washing. What happened? She asked, rushing to him. Alex hesitated, then mumbled, Some kids were picking on a boy at school. I told them to stop. They didn't like that. Maggie's heart clenched. She gently tilted his face to inspect the bruise. You got into a fight? Not really, he said with a small shrug. I just didn't think it was fair. I had to do something. Maggie exhaled, shaking her head, but pride warmed her chest. You've got a good heart, Alex, she murmured, pressing a soft kiss to his forehead. But remember, fighting doesn't always solve things. Alex grinned. I know. But sometimes, people need to know they can't just push others around. Maggie saw it then, the fire inside him. The same stubborn determination she had seen in Eleanor's eyes the day she had given up everything to save him. You'll do great things one day, sweetheart, she thought. I just know it. While Alex grew up in a world of struggle and love, Nick Whitmore built an empire of power and greed. Years had made him richer, colder, untouchable. His marriage to Victoria Harrington had been nothing more than a strategic move, solidifying his connections to the political elite. He had no time for love or sentimentality. His focus was on expanding his influence. He sat in his penthouse office, overlooking the city skyline, his empire laid out before him. A call came through. One of his executives. A deal had gone through. Another million in his pocket. Another company swallowed whole by Whitmore Enterprises. Nick leaned back in his leather chair, a satisfied smirk on his face. He had everything. Or so he thought. Because somewhere in the city, the son he had abandoned was growing up with nothing but the lessons of kindness, resilience, and integrity. And soon, fate would bring them face to face once more. Neither of them knowing how much they were about to change each other's lives. The sound of coughing rattled through the small apartment, breaking the fragile silence of the early morning. Alex Dawson, now 17 years old, sat beside his mother's bed, wringing a damp cloth in his hands. He gently dabbed her forehead, feeling the heat radiating from her fevered skin. Maggie's once strong frame had withered, her breaths coming in shallow, painful gasps. Her eyes, once filled with warmth and quiet determination, were now sunken, shadowed by illness. Mom, Alex whispered, his voice tight with worry, I'm going to the pharmacy. I'll get more medicine. Maggie's frail hand reached out, gripping his wrist with surprising strength. Sweetheart, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. We both know there's no medicine that can fix this. Alex clenched his jaw, refusing to accept the truth. There has to be something, he said, his voice rising in desperation. I just need more time, more money. I can find another job. Maggie gave him a weak, knowing smile. You've been working yourself to the bone for me, Alex, she said softly. You shouldn't have to. Alex shook his head. He would work every hour of every day if it meant keeping her alive. She was all he had. She was his home. And he wasn't ready to lose her. For months, Alex had done everything he could to keep Maggie alive. He had taken every odd job he could find, washing dishes, delivering newspapers, hauling crates at the market, even sleeping in the back of a mechanic's shop just to afford her medication. But no matter how hard he worked, it was never enough. The bills kept piling up. The medicine kept running out. And Maggie kept getting worse. One night, after another long shift, Alex made a decision he never thought he'd have to make. He stood outside a pawn shop, gripping the silver medallion around his neck. It was his only possession of value. The one thing Maggie had told him was special. He had never taken it off. But now, I can get a few hundred for this, he told himself, trying to justify the decision. That's enough for at least another round of medicine. Maybe a doctor's visit. His fingers trembled as he reached up to unclasp it. But then he heard Maggie's voice in his head. Keep it with you, sweetheart. It's the key to your past. Alex froze. Then, with a shaky breath, he turned and walked away. Somehow he knew. This medallion, it was the only connection he had to a life he never knew. And something told him he wasn't meant to give it up, even if it meant losing her. The night Maggie Dawson died, the world felt smaller. Alex held her frail body in his arms, tears streaming down his face as he rocked her gently, as if he could will her to stay. Her breathing was shallow, each gasp weaker than the last. "Mama," he choked, his voice breaking. "Please stay with me." Maggie lifted a trembling hand and cupped his cheek, her fingers cold against his skin. "My sweet boy," she whispered. "You have such a good heart. Never lose that." Alex sobbed, clutching her tighter. He would give anything for more time. "Listen to me, Alex," Maggie said, forcing the last of her strength into her words. "You are meant for more than this life. More than struggle. More than pain." She pressed the silver medallion into his palm. "This," she rasped, her voice barely a breath, "is your past. One day, it will lead you to the truth." Alex looked down at the medallion, his vision blurred by tears. Then, with one final breath, Maggie Dawson was gone. The world shattered. And Alex was alone. The apartment was too quiet. Too empty. Alex sat on the floor for what felt like hours, the weight of his loss suffocating him. No money. No family. No home. By the time the landlord came knocking, he already knew what was coming. "Kid, I'm sorry," the old man said, voice gruff but not unkind. "Your mama was behind on rent. I can't keep you here." Alex swallowed hard, fighting back the lump in his throat. He had nowhere to go. No one to turn to. So he packed a single backpack with a change of clothes, a photo of Maggie, and the medallion. Then he walked out the door. Into a world that didn't care if he lived or died. The next few weeks were hell. Alex learned quickly that the streets were merciless. Cold nights on park benches. Scraping together coins for stale bread. The constant hunger. The exhaustion. But even in the darkest moments, he never let go of the lessons Maggie taught him. When he saw another homeless man shivering in the cold, he shared his thin blanket. When he found a lost wallet, he returned it instead of taking the money inside. He held on to the only thing that still mattered. His mother's kindness. And through it all, he kept the medallion close, clutching it whenever he felt like giving up. Somehow he knew this wasn't the end of his story. He didn't know how, or when. But one day, the past would find him. And he would finally learn the truth. The cold wind howled through the alleyways of the city, slicing through Alex Dawson's threadbare jacket like a knife. Winter had come, and the streets were unforgiving. He pulled his knees to his chest, trying to preserve whatever warmth he could as he sat against the brick wall of an abandoned building. It had been days since he'd eaten a full meal. The hunger, the exhaustion, they never really went away. The streets had taught him harsh lessons. Trust no one too quickly. Always keep one eye open at night. Never show weakness. And yet, despite his suffering, Alex still refused to let the world harden him. One evening, as he searched for scraps behind a diner, he found a younger boy curled up in a pile of damp newspapers. The kid, maybe 10 years old, was shivering violently, his lips turning blue. Alex hesitated, knowing he barely had enough to keep himself warm. Then he sighed and peeled off his own thin hoodie, draping it over the kid's frail shoulders. "Here," he muttered. "It's not much, but it'll help." The boy looked up at him with wide, grateful eyes. "But, won't you be cold?" Alex forced a smile, even though his own fingers were already numb. "I'll survive," he said. "You need it more." That night, as Alex tried to sleep on a park bench, he clutched the silver medallion under his shirt and whispered, "I hope you're watching, Mom." I hope I'm making you proud." Across the city, in a penthouse far removed from hunger and suffering, Nick Whitmore sat in a private hospital suite, staring at the ceiling. The world had never told him no. Until now. "There has to be a mistake," he said, his voice tight as he faced his doctor. Dr. Bennett, an older man with a reputation for discretion among the wealthy elite, gave him a somber look. "I ran the test twice, Nick. You have myelodysplastic syndrome, a rare blood disorder. If left untreated, it will develop into leukemia." Nick's fingers clenched into fists. "So treat it." Dr. Bennett exhaled. "The only long-term solution is a bone marrow transplant. And we need a close biological match, a child, a sibling, a parent." Nick stiffened. He had no siblings. His mother was gone. His father had died decades ago. And he had no children. Right? For the first time in over 18 years, a memory clawed its way to the surface. A stormy night, a crying infant wrapped in a blue blanket, the glint of a silver medallion. Nick's stomach twisted. "Run the tests," he ordered. "Test my wife, my cousins. There has to be a match somewhere." Dr. Bennett sighed, already knowing the answer. "Nick, we both know that's unlikely. Blood relatives, direct descendants, have the best chance of compatibility." Nick shoved down the guilt. He had moved past that mistake. Hadn't he? 2 days later, Nick Whitmore sat at his desk, staring at a list of test results. Not a single match. Victoria had tried to comfort him, but he could see it in her eyes, the fear of losing everything if he didn't survive. He couldn't die. He wouldn't die. There was only one option left. Nick clenched his jaw before picking up his phone and dialing a number he hadn't used in years. "Derek, I need you to find someone for me." On the other end of the line, Derek Nash, his private investigator, chuckled. "You usually have me track down corporate rivals, not people. Who are we looking for?" Nick exhaled. He didn't want to say it. Finally, his lips parted, and for the first time in nearly 2 decades, he acknowledged the truth. "My son." Pause. Then Derek's tone shifted. "The one you abandoned?" Nick gritted his teeth. "I need to find him. Fast." Another silence. Then Derek sighed. "You do realize the kid might be dead, right?" Nick swallowed hard. "Find him anyway." Because for the first time in his perfectly controlled life, Nick Whitmore was desperate. And the only person who could save him was the son he had left for dead. While Nick's men scoured the city, Alex curled up in the back of an abandoned warehouse, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. His body ached from hunger. His hands were frozen stiff. But his heart was still his mother's. No matter how cruel the world was, he refused to become like the people who had left him behind. And soon, very soon, his past would find him. Not as a reunion, but as a reckoning. Nick Whitmore never looked weak. His presence alone commanded attention. Sharp suits, calculated words, a gaze that could reduce men to silence. He was untouchable. Until now. The world around him tilted as he stumbled out of his car and onto the busy sidewalk of downtown Manhattan. He had felt off all morning, a tightness in his chest, dizziness that came in waves. He had ignored it like he ignored everything that tried to slow him down. But his body had reached its limit. A searing pain shot through his chest, stealing his breath. His vision blurred. Nick gasped, gripping a streetlight for support as pedestrians walked past him, oblivious. Then, everything went black. Alex Dawson knew the signs. He had seen it before, the way a person's body gave up before they did. The way they crumbled in the middle of the street, ignored by passers-by, just another casualty in a world that didn't care. But Alex cared. So when he saw the man collapse just ahead of him, an older guy, well-dressed, expensive watch glinting under the city lights, he didn't hesitate. "Hey, someone call an ambulance." Alex shouted, already rushing forward. No one stopped. No one cared. But Alex did. He knelt beside the man, pressing 2 fingers to his neck. A pulse. Weak but there. "Sir, can you hear me?" Alex shook his shoulder, noticing for the first time how pale the man was. Nick's breathing was ragged, his face contorted in pain. "Hang in there," Alex murmured, his voice softer now. "Help's coming. Just hold on." Nick Whitmore felt himself slipping. Somewhere in the haze, a voice broke through. Steady. Strong. Familiar. He barely registered the warm pressure of a hand holding his. "Sir, stay with me," the voice urged. "You're not alone." Nick wanted to scoff. He had been alone his entire life. But for the first time in years he felt something other than power, other than control. He felt safe. The ambulance finally arrived, red and blue lights flashing against the darkening sky. As the paramedics lifted Nick onto the stretcher, Alex found himself gripping his hand tighter. "You're gonna be okay," he said, not knowing why he felt the need to reassure a stranger. Nick's fingers weakly curled around Alex's. Then, as they placed an oxygen mask over his face, his grip loosened. And just like that, he was gone. Not dead, but unconscious. Alex stepped back, watching as the ambulance doors slammed shut. He should have walked away. He should have left this rich stranger to his fate. But for some reason, he couldn't. So as the sirens wailed into the night, Alex Dawson did something he had never done before. He followed. Nick Whitmore had built an empire of power and cruelty. Alex Dawson had survived a life of struggle and kindness. Neither of them knew they had just collided with fate. Neither of them knew that this moment, this encounter, would change everything. And neither of them knew that the past they both tried to outrun was about to catch up with them, faster than they could ever imagine. The fluorescent lights in the hospital waiting room buzzed softly as Alex Dawson sat in a stiff plastic chair, bouncing his knee anxiously. He wasn't sure why he was still here. He had done his part, helped a stranger in the street, rode with him in the ambulance, stayed to make sure he didn't die alone. Yet something kept him from leaving. Maybe it was the way the man had gripped his hand. Maybe it was the way he had looked so lost despite being rich, powerful, and dressed in a suit that probably cost more than everything Alex had ever owned. Or maybe, deep down, something inside him already knew the truth. "Excuse me, sir." Alex looked up to see a tall, sharp-eyed woman standing in front of him. Her name tag read Melissa Carter, Whitmore Enterprises. Whitmore. The name sounded familiar. She cleared her throat. "You were with Mr. Whitmore when he collapsed, correct?" Yeah. Alex rubbed the back of his neck. I don't really know him. I just helped." Melissa studied him carefully. "I need to ask you something unusual." Alex narrowed his eyes. "Okay." She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "We ran preliminary tests on Mr. Whitmore. He requires a bone marrow transplant as soon as possible. Unfortunately, none of his known relatives are a match." Alex blinked. "And what does that have to do with me?" Melissa exhaled. "Your blood type and genetic markers showed an extremely high level of compatibility." Alex's stomach twisted. You think I'm a match?" "There's a chance," Melissa admitted. "But we need further tests to be sure." Alex frowned. This didn't make sense. He had never met this man before. How could their blood be so similar? But then money. "Would I get paid for this?" he asked hesitantly. Melissa's expression barely shifted. "Mr. Whitmore is a wealthy man. If you're a match, you will be compensated generously." Alex bit his lip. He needed the money. Renting a cheap motel room for a few nights, food that wasn't stale bread, a second-hand winter coat, this could change everything. "Fine," he muttered. "I'll do it." He followed Melissa down the hall, unaware that he was walking toward a truth that would shatter his world. Hours later, Alex sat in a private hospital suite, staring at the ceiling as a nurse drew blood from his arm. "Just relax," she said kindly. "This will only take a minute." Melissa stood nearby, watching closely. Alex got the feeling this wasn't just about medical results. His instincts were right. 30 minutes later, the doctor returned, holding a clipboard with an expression that was anything but professional neutrality. "Well?" Melissa asked. The doctor hesitated. "The results are highly unusual." Melissa's brows furrowed. "Unusual how?" The doctor adjusted his glasses and looked directly at Alex. "He's not just a match for Mr. Whitmore's bone marrow." Pause. "He is his biological son." The room went silent. Alex froze. His pulse thundered in his ears, his vision tunneling. "Is what?" Melissa's face went blank with shock. That can't be right." Alex's voice came out hoarse. "That's a mistake." But the doctor shook his head. "The DNA is conclusive." Alex's heart pounded against his ribs. Nick Whitmore. The man he had saved. The man who had collapsed on the street. The man dying in this hospital. Was his father. Nick Whitmore stirred awake, his body weak, his mind foggy from medication. But when he opened his eyes, he knew something was wrong. Melissa stood at the foot of his bed, her arms crossed tightly, her usual composure shattered. Nick frowned. "What?" Melissa exhaled, rubbing her temples. "Nick, we found a donor." Nick narrowed his eyes. "That's good news. Why do you look like someone just set the building on fire?" She swallowed. "Because the donor is your son." Nick's breath caught in his throat. "No." The words slammed into him like a freight train, knocking the air from his lungs. "His son?" The child he had abandoned on a stormy night, wrapped in a blue blanket, left with nothing but a silver medallion? That's impossible, Nick rasped, his hands trembling against the bedsheets. Melissa's voice was grim. The DNA doesn't lie, Nick. Nick felt sick. For years he had convinced himself the child was dead. That was easier than facing the truth. But the truth had just walked into this hospital. And now that same child held his life in his hands. Alex sat outside Nick's hospital room, his mind racing. This couldn't be real. Nick Whitmore, the ruthless billionaire, was his father? The man who had left him to die. The man who had caused his mother a lifetime of suffering. And now, this man needed him. Melissa approached hesitantly. Alex. He looked up, his hands clenched into fists. I know this is a lot to process, she said. But Mr. Whitmore, Nick, he doesn't have much time. Without this transplant. She let the words hang. Alex's throat felt tight. You expect me to save him? His voice was hoarse. After everything he's done. Melissa hesitated. I expect you to make the choice that feels right to you. Alex's gaze dropped to his lap. His mother's voice echoed in his mind. You have a good heart, Alex. Never lose that. Nick Whitmore had taken everything from him. And yet, his mother had raised him to be better. Alex took a shaky breath. I'll do it. Melissa exhaled in relief. I'll inform the doctors. But as she walked away, Alex knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Nick Whitmore had just been given a second chance at life. And when he woke up, he would have to face the son he had once thrown away. Nick Whitmore sat up in his hospital bed, his body still weak from surgery, but his mind sharp with anticipation. He knew this moment was coming. And yet, when the door swung open, when Alex Dawson stepped inside, everything in him tightened. Nick had spent years running from his past. Now, his past had walked straight into his hospital room. Alex didn't speak at first. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, his green eyes, the same shade as Nick's, burning with unspoken rage. The silence was suffocating. Finally, Alex broke it. Start talking. Nick exhaled, running a shaky hand through his graying hair. I suppose you want an apology. Alex's jaw clenched. I don't want an apology. I want the truth. Nick's stomach twisted. The truth. The thing he had spent decades trying to forget. But there was no escaping it now. So, for the first time in 18 years, Nick Whitmore confessed. I was young, Nick began, his voice hollow. Ambitious. Hungry for power. Victoria's father, Senator Harrington, was offering me a future most men could only dream of. He swallowed. And then, your mother happened. Alex flinched. Nick saw it. But he kept going. Emma Carter was a maid in my estate. She wasn't supposed to be part of my life. But she was kind. Genuine. Unlike anyone I had ever known. A ghost of a smile flickered across his face, a memory of something he had buried long ago. When she told me she was pregnant, I panicked. I had spent my entire life clawing my way to the top, and in one moment, everything I had worked for was at risk. Alex's fists tightened at his sides. So you left us, he said bitterly. Like trash. Nick forced himself to meet his son's gaze. I made a choice, he admitted. A cold, calculated decision. I thought, if I got rid of you, I could erase the mistake. Marry Victoria. Secure my future. Alex let out a sharp, humorless laugh. A mistake, he echoed. That's what I was to you? Nick looked away. He had no defense. He had spent years convincing himself it was justifiable. That he had no choice. But sitting here now, looking into the face of the man he had once left for dead, he knew the truth. There had always been a choice. And he had chosen wrong. Alex felt sick. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times. Had fantasized about what he would say if he ever met the man who had thrown him away. But now that he was here, standing in front of him, all he felt was emptiness. My mother begged for your help, Alex said, his voice tight with emotion. She worked herself to death to take care of me. She suffered. She died in my arms, because of you. Nick swallowed hard. There was nothing he could say to change that. And now, Alex continued, taking a step closer, his eyes flashing with anger, you're here. Weak. Helpless. The same way she was. Nick tensed. You threw me away, Alex said, his voice cracking. You left me to die. Nick's mouth opened, but no words came. Because Alex was right. And now, his son held his life in his hands. A long, tense silence filled the hospital room. Nick Whitmore had never been at anyone's mercy before. But now he was at Alex's. After everything you did, Alex said slowly, "I could walk away right now." Nick held his breath. Alex clenched his fists. "I could let you suffer. Let you feel what it's like to have no one." Nick didn't beg. He wouldn't. He had never begged for anything in his life. But for the first time ever, he was afraid. Afraid of what his son would choose. Afraid of what he had created. The silence stretched. Then, Alex exhaled sharply, his expression shifting. "But I won't." Nick's chest tightened. Alex shook his head. "You don't deserve my help. You don't deserve anything from me." Nick braced himself for the final blow. But then Alex stepped back. "I did it for my mother," he said quietly. "Not for you." Nick stared at him. Alex's green eyes held nothing but cold, quiet finality. "I saved your life," Alex murmured. "But I will never be your son." Then, without another word, he turned and walked out the door. Nick Whitmore watched his son leave. And for the first time in his life he realized this was a loss he would never recover from. Alex Dawson stood outside the hospital, staring at the city skyline, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. The man who had abandoned him was now the man whose life he had saved. Not for love. Not for forgiveness. But because he refused to become Nick Whitmore. He had seen what hate and greed had done to Nick, what selfishness had cost him. Alex refused to live with that same poison in his veins. So when the doctors told him he was a perfect match, when they said he had the power to let Nick live or die, he had made his choice. He had saved him. Not for Nick. For himself. Nick Whitmore had never been powerless before. But as he lay in his hospital bed, recovering from a surgery that had been his last chance at survival, he realized, for the first time in his life, someone had given him something he didn't deserve. He wasn't sure if it was mercy or punishment. The door creaked open and Alex stepped inside. Nick sat up slowly, pain shooting through his body. He had so much to say, so much to fix. "Alex." But Alex cut him off. "I'm not here for you," he said flatly. "I just wanted to tell you something before I go." Nick swallowed, dreading the final verdict. Alex took a slow breath. "I saved your life." Nick nodded, his throat dry. "I know. I didn't do it for you," Alex continued, his voice calm but firm. "I did it so I could move on. So I wouldn't have to carry the same hate you do." Nick felt the words like a blade. Alex stepped closer, his green eyes, the same eyes Nick had spent years trying to forget, staring straight into him. "But don't think this changes anything," Alex said. Nick braced himself. "I saved your life," Alex murmured. "But I will never be your son." Nick closed his eyes. When he opened them, Alex was already turning to leave. "Wait," Nick called out. Let me help you. You don't have to struggle anymore." Alex stopped at the door, his back still to him. "I never needed your help," he said softly. Then, without another word, he walked away. Alex never looked back. He didn't need to. He had made his choice. Not to forgive. Not to forget. But to free himself. He had spent his entire life searching for something. Answers, justice, a place to belong. But now he realized, he wasn't meant to look for his past. He was meant to build his own future. One that had nothing to do with Nick Whitmore. So he walked into the unknown, carrying only his mother's memory and the lessons she had taught him. And that was enough. Nick Whitmore watched his son leave. And for the first time in his entire existence, money, power, none of it mattered. Because what he had lost could never be bought back. Not with apologies. Not with fortune. Not with time. He had been given a second chance at life. But it had come at the cost of the one thing he could never get back. His son. His legacy wasn't power. It was the emptiness Alex left behind. And Nick would carry that weight forever. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more moving narratives. Your thoughts mean the world to us, so share your perspective in the comments below. Would you have made the same choice as Alex? Or do you think justice was not fully served? Let's discuss.